pronounces as entremont. You can.
Hello and welcome to the Great White North, your destination for the iciest cold takes from the frozen wastelands of the north. I'm your host, Charles Constantine, and with me is NP. And today we have a special guest, Don Tremont, the translator for the collected works of Adrian Arcand. Say hello, boys.
Hello. Hello, Charles. How's your... Oh, sorry, I've got him muted. Charles, carry on introducing the fella.
NP.
Can you hear me? One second. Our usual technical brilliance. Can you hear me or not? Sorry. Technical difficulties. Hello! Brilliant. I was muted, everyone was muted, everything was muted, the music was playing. Stunning entrance. I was here sitting ready like a Howard Stern, except less Jewish and awful, like just ready with all my devices, like just a radio professional, and it went to shit. But that's how she goes.
Away she goes.
Hi guys, do you hear me now?
Yes. I thought...
Hey Charles.
Oh, hey.
I'd like to also say good evening to the audience. My name is D'Entremont. I am the translator of Serviam, and I did the work with Antelope Hill Publishing back in, I think it was 2021 when I got that work done. So a couple of years ago already.
Yes.
Nice. Yeah, and we've talked about the book before on the show. It's a really solid work. He was a very interesting figure, and it blows my mind that it seems no Canadians have ever heard of him, despite his influence and his role as one of the most outspoken individuals in Canada against the World War II, Jewish power, the whole deal. And he just seems to have been completely thrown aside, and this work has brought him back into the light. So good on you for making that happen.
Oh, it was my pleasure. He was someone who, before the project, I was almost integrally familiar with. He was one of the most known politicians in Canada at a time, which shows how history erases everything eventually, how all the information on him has been lost to time, has been lost to the decades since his passing, and really since his, I would say his most important works through the 1930s and early 40s, right up to the war. It's a shame how much has been lost. I've managed to actually put some pieces together. I have a nice collection of his works, so original pamphlets of the party right here beside me. Actually, I took them all out. I have some of his artwork. I managed to piece together a bit of his life, but nevertheless, he just remains such an unknown figure. Yes, to Canadians, but to the whole world as well. I I would say a lot of that is just due to the fact that he's mostly a francophone, although he was bilingual, and he mostly did work on a national party here in Canada. He primarily worked under the French Canadian banner, in the sense that they divided up the political strategy between like like the English, so the western part of Canada, and then the eastern part, which was under his, I would say his purview, his control. So there is that language divide as well, which does not help.
Right. But again, we got people like you doing the work to bridge that gap. You said you were intimately acquainted with him before. Where did you first get in touch with what he was all about?
Well, the first time has to be some years ago when I saw his name on poll, but as I started looking more and more into him, so 4chan poll, some like 10 years ago, but the more and more I actually started paying attention to who he was, and I started talking to him about others like around me, so friends and family actually. I've actually learned that he was interred alongside my one of my family members out in I think it was New Brunswick during the war. So they had an internment camp in the Maritimes, and it just so happened that one of my family members had been acquainted with him.
Okay, that's that's an interesting connection, and that whole story of the internment during the war. I think there's a section about that in the biography in the book, and that was really eye opening to me because you always hear about the internment of the Japanese and all these these oppressed minority groups, but you don't hear that the Canadian government did this to their own citizens. I think that biography also mentioned the mayor of Montreal. Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but they basically blackbagged him in the middle of the night for being against the war. Did they not?
Correct. That was one of the more darkest. That's one of the most darkest periods of our history in Canada. It's the illegal arrestation of Camillien Hood, who was the mayor of Montreal, the most beloved mayor of Montreal to ever live, who was actually pro National Socialist and fascist at the time. He was ripped out of his bed in the middle of the night. They put a black bag over his head, according to the story, and they interned him. Nobody knew where he was, not even his wife and children, for years until they finally let them know that he's all right. That he was all right. And then I also know that when he was released after the war, he was welcomed back into Montreal by 50,000, if not more, spectators who were applauding his sacrifice. And then he won the election the next year.
Okay, wow. So yeah, that's a incredible story because I mean nowadays you see the typical conservative complaining about oppression and Trudeau is bringing this tyranny that we've never seen before in Canada, and it goes against our history of proper freedom and democracy. But something like that shows that it really hasn't always been the case
It
at
also
all.
it also goes to show this. Our mothers are always like, "Oh, don't go to jail. Don't smoke crack. You'll never be mayor." Wrong again, mom.
Well, Cam Hood, he liked to eat. He was a bit of a rotund man, but he had good politics. He was a very charming man, nevertheless. And the reason why, I guess I guess it would be the Crown who had arrested him. Uh, the reason was due to the fact that they had implemented the War Measures Act at the offset of the war. So right up to that point, two things had happened. One, they arrested the fascists, so all Italian sympathizers were arrested. So, for example, if you go to Montreal, there's actually a church called Notre Dame. Well, it's in English, it'd be Our Lady of the Defense, out in Little Italy. And on the mural in the back of the church, there's a painting of a certain bald man named Benito Mussolini for the celebration. And the painter himself was arrested and interned just for painting such a mural, for such a beautiful piece. It's still up there today. You can go ahead and visit it if ever you're in Montreal. I recommend it. It's quite beautiful. The church itself, not just the mural. Of course, the mural has a political sentiment for myself, which I approve of. But nevertheless, they implemented these War Measures Acts. They arrested people in the middle of the night on the street, in broad daylight sometimes, whenever they could get them, and they sent them to the camps. Many of these people were never tried, so they were not convicted of treason. They were just people who were, sadly, in the way of the British liberal system, of course, with the allies being their allies being the Jews, and maybe the communists and Freemasons, etc., which Adrien Arcand brings up many, many times in his works, especially in the ones that I translated. So all this to say, the rules-based system of the liberal power is a hypocritical rules-based system. They only have excuse me. Let me rephrase that. They only have a rules-based system when it benefits them, for the maintaining of their order. But the second that this system actually impacts them, that it actually threatens their power, you see them deny it, that it even exists.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that anarcho-tyranny that Sam Francis talks about, that uneven application of the law according to who it suits. And yeah, it seems to have been the case for quite some time. And it blows my mind that there was no ability to disagree with this war that devastated the population. For some reason, we have to go fight this war across the ocean in a completely different continent for interests that didn't actually impact any average Canadians. And people that were against that were, again, like you just laid out, were completely thrown under the bus with no due process. And it shows how much has always been wrong in the institutions of this country.
About that, Charles, what had happened was, I think we need to go just a little back in history.
Sure.
Obviously, there's always been a lot of animosity between the French and the English, going back to their 100-year war, if not sooner, if not even before that. But in Canada, particularly, after the British had full control, obviously the French Canadians did suffer some economic disparity as a result. So they were not allowed to essentially run the industries here in Canada, while the English had almost full control. So what had happened is that obviously the British subjects were happy to fight alongside the United States. We're happy to fight alongside Britain and even France to some point, but the French Canadians were not. And in World War I, they were essentially dragged. Oh, I dropped something. Excuse me. They were essentially dragged all the way to Europe to fight in the war, and they were left with the bitter taste in their mouth. And they said, "Not again. Not another time, unless you give us a vote." Right? So we have the crisis of conscription here in Canada that you can read all about. But essentially, French Canadians voted 90% against conscription, going to war in World War II, after they fought in World War I. But the British voted the other way. They voted 90% for. So the British dragged the French Canadians along with them, because they determined it was a national vote, even though French Canadians were completely against going over there.
It reminds me of the Irish. The Irish have been fighting British conscription for, 1,000 years, in very similar ways.
Well, I'm sure the Irish, as a proponent of history and someone who studies history thoroughly, there are a lot of similarities between the Irish and the French Canadians. I would say the Irish have had it a lot worse, probably due to proximity, and also the fact that this land is just so open. There's such an open space that there's room for everyone here in North America. I think that helps as well.
Actually, on that note, there's a interesting story that I read about, basically from a history book, about early Canada, and waves of Irish immigrants that came to Canada ended up benefiting quite a bit from the French Canadians, the Catholic French Canadians, who were willing to use their medical care to look after a lot of the immigrants that were affected by um, the kinds of conditions they dealt with at the home country. So yeah, there's some connection there that uh, came about through their interaction. These two groups on in the New World.
Especially because they were both Catholics and they both hated the English, the British, well, the English, yes. Especially, I think that they
Mm-hmm.
were able to coalesce and actually work together. So I know in the area where I live currently that, we used to say there's something called a Québécois de souche, which is like a old stock Quebecer or French Canadian, but everyone has about maybe an eighth or a quarter Irish in them here.
Yeah, that's interesting, and it speaks to some of the ways which the Canadian ethnogenesis has operated. The way the interaction between these different groups. Now, on that note of Catholicism, Adrian Arcand's Catholicism comes into play here, and I think what I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about um, is the title of the book, Serviam, and it means I will serve, and it refers to Saint Michael. And I was wondering, would you be able to elaborate what that meant for Adrian Arcand and some of the stuff that he's talking about here?
Well, I'm not the man himself. I do consider myself, although an expert on his beliefs, someone who's studied him thoroughly enough. It's obviously, like you said, an allusion to a reference to the Bible. So, in particular, I think you have to see his worldview as a duality between good versus evil. Those that serve God,
Hey,
him in his.
sorry, we're losing you a little bit.
Oh, do you want me to repeat that?
Just the last sentence, please.
Yes, no problem. So Arkan sees the world in sort of a black and white sense. There's good people who serve God, and then there's those who serve the devil and who serve evil, essentially. So we have to put that into context here. What had happened in the Bible is that when Lucifer and all the other fallen angels had decided to leave heaven, Lucifer essentially cried out, "Non serviam," which is "I will not serve." To which Saint Michael, the angel, had said, "I will serve, serviam," and that's where it comes from. So Arcan would be of the camp that is saying, "I am for God. I am willing to serve God. I'm willing to serve that higher order."
The metaphysical background of Akan is really tangible throughout the his speeches, and one of the things we talked about a lot was this notion of international spiritualism. Do you have any insight into that?
Oh, well, so that goes to back to an old Christian tenet, an old Catholic tenet, essentially. So the I think we also have to put out the duality again. It's not just international spiritualism, but what does it represent in the face of international materialism? So, if, like you said, he is a metaphysicist. I would say he's almost a mystic in a lot of regards, like a modern Catholic mystic and philosopher. Uh, and he does give some hints towards this in his works and in his speeches. So, if I were to guess what he means by this, is that we're in a global war. We're in a scenario where everyone has to take a side. And he does see this as a spiritual battle. So when he proposes something like international spiritualism, he proposes essentially a global battle for good against evil. He says it's international because uh, it is a correspondence between various nations. Now, he was not international in the modern sense, where everyone mixes together. I promise you, he was not like that. And everyone is the same. He believed in no such nonsense. Obviously, the man had as what I would call uh, uh, when you discriminatory tastes. I was looking for the word. He has very high discriminatory tastes. I don't think he hated anyone, except for maybe the Jews,
Maybe the
but
Freemasons.
maybe the Freemasons too. Anyone who was like truly in the camp of Satan as he saw it. But my view is that there's good people all over the world, and we should have cooperation between nations. We should be able to respect each other, not go to war halfway across the world with foreigners that we hardly know for the profits of a very few. I think is a succinct way that he would put it in.
Yeah, and that
Yes.
seems like a pretty reasonable position to hold. The like you said, he has this duality between the material being the domain of the national, or and then spiritual being in the international. So yeah, you can develop these bonds internationally because of this universal faith, but that doesn't mean you just reject material realities that you live within, and you can afford dignity to each given group of people based on their material conditions and who they are. And I think that was something that stuck with me the most from his writings here is uh, yeah, you can hold to the same faith despite being materially different, and then you can respect each other within that realm.
I think that's well put. I would even add in context that he was a political man, so there is in no way any chance that he would abandon the material world, the physical world that we live in. That was not his mission in life. That was not his purpose, whether by God or by himself. I think he saw that he was very well entrenched in the material world. He was not properly fit for the priesthood. He was talented at his various gifts, whether it be writing, whether it be just writing, for example. He wrote one of the first books in what's called Joual, which is essentially like the Quebec dialect of French. He was talented in journalism. He was one of the most successful journalists. He was a successful businessman, a successful orator, a successful politician. He met with who knows how many well recognized Canadians, even today, politicians. He met with the high class of society, whether it be French or English. He was a beloved man as well, despite what some may say today. To be honest with you, they're wrong. He had, yes, he had enemies, but most people respected him. Most people revered him. Most people saw him as a very well civilized man, respectful, polite, talented, dynamic, etc. So he had a sense of being able to encourage people to bring the better out of them. So I don't think he was abandoning the material world whatsoever. If anything, he was having his spiritual fight in the material world. For example, by implicating himself in a political fight, he knew that his politics was a spiritual mission.
I'm glad you brought that up and put that way, because that is a difficult thing to understand. Uh, a lot of people accuse Catholics of just worrying about the next life and all that, and yeah, to bring the spiritual fight to this fallen world, that's a very nice way to cross that bridge.
And he didn't neglect his spiritual life. I don't want that to be the lesson here as well. And I think you know that, but I want the audience to get that. Um, every person honestly has a different place in the world. And while we should focus on the spiritual life, it's not truly made for everyone. It's a difficult thing to do and to wrap your head around it. I have tried myself, and while I have made progress, I don't think I will ever have the same
Oh, well,
sophisticated
this is quite
yes,
simple. My hippie girlfriend would be able to tell you that some people are air signs and some are water and some are earth. And so the earth ones are more in they focus more in the material world, and the air signs are, they're going to They're gonna be more spiritual in priest class and all that. And that's
All
kind
right.
of
So
it's this.
so Adolf was the fire, Mussolini was the earth. That would
Yeah.
make Arcan the I don't know, the air.
Yeah, I would say. Or maybe
Something like that.
Ravenclaw. I'll have to ask her.
Oh man. I'm gonna
He's got to
pretend I
take a
didn't hear
BuzzFeed test.
that. Yeah. I mean, he was also a very humorous man. He wrote just to go back. I just I know where I lost track of my idea, but it brought up another thought of mine is that he was a humorous man. He was known to write quite funny caricatures, so caricatures in the newspapers, for example. Many of which I wish I can show you on a live stream like this, but
Yeah,
maybe
if you
you
fire
can't.
them to me in the chat, I'll put them on the screen.
Oh man, I think he makes Striker from Germany and his his contemporary, the what's his name, something Striker,
Julius
the
Stryker.
Julius Striker. He makes him blush sometimes.
That's
Um,
interesting because yeah, you think of him as some sort of like the vibe you get from him in the text is that he's a very serious, very spiritual man, but
oh,
it
and
just
he
shows that how
was.
well rounded he was. But it just shows that how well rounded he has all aspects, and there's no reason, no doubt why he was so successful and well liked from the sounds of it.
He was a modern Renaissance man in a sense, except for maybe he wasn't that big on the science. But for as far as the social sciences goes, he was quite a remarkable man, and he was certainly well rounded, as you said.
Yeah, he even
Um,
has this beautiful poem about Mary at the end as well.
Yes, and he was devoted to her. From what I gather, he encouraged all his men, at least on the Quebec side, so the French Canadian Catholic side, to pray. Well, I'm going to be careful with my words here because I might insult a Protestant or two. But uh, what we would say, pray to her, but essentially, to pray through her would be a better way, or ask her or to ask her to pray for
Intercession.
us to God. Intercession is the right word. Thank you. I can't find any of them right now. I had them on my computer a long time ago.
We'll make sure to
Um,
link those and get them out there for sure. If you find them, meanwhile, just throw them to me in the chat, and I will put them up.
what
But
you
while
can
you're
do
going through your
is go
notes,
ahead.
you said you
Mhm.
found some rare tidbits about him. Is there anything you can tell us about him that like no one would know, like or have any passages that are unpublished?
Unpublished stuff. Well, it's all published. I the problem is that it hasn't been republished in maybe 100 years.
Close
Hold on, let
enough.
me see what I can pull up. Yeah, I know it might as well be. This stuff is lost to time, literally. Let me see what I got here. I also have to translate it from French. I'm just pulling out my pile right now. Maybe I'll put them on archive.org at one point. There's one piece of history that I have in front of me, and I, I can't figure out what it is, but essentially, it says in French, and I translate. Um, the 6 million Jews and the gas chambers are a lie uh, that is unique in history, especially in unique in human history, and it's essentially a professor, for example, who published to a judge a two-page um, dismantling of the gas chambers, and it seems to be an original document that I had my hands on when I pulled out his archives. So I thought that was funny. He did write music as well. Like there is a Serviam uh, anthem, which I should probably get to put on archive at one point.
Do you have the sheet music?
I have it right here in front of me.
Oh man. Okay, we can fire that at Audio Nerd and Winkler, and they can whip that right up on any
Yeah,
instrument we'd like. I'm sure they'd love to do that for us.
I'm sure we can do that. Absolutely. If not, there are his old journals. Like he had a journal called Serviam. He had one which is one of the titles of um, of the book, which is the Key of Mystery. And there's a lot of little things in here. It, what's in regards to like small little facts about his life is it's difficult to know, honestly. I kind of revealed a lot of them. Oh, I know one that's not in the book. This is a great one. I'm glad you asked that question. So, this is a bit of a story. It's I don't know if it's a fact or if it's a myth or what, but I heard from a friend who also studies him greatly that he actually during one of his meetings um, went to a man who was sitting there. It was his first time as an initiate in his meetings. And he looks at him, shakes his hand, and says, I know why you're here. I know what you're doing, and I know what you want. And I can tell you that we commit no illegal activities during these meetings. And he just leaves. So he essentially had spotted an infiltrator from the RCMP during one of his meetings. Is the legend, and he just looked him in the eye and essentially kicked them out in front of everyone.
You probably saw the
This
donut crumbs on his shirt.
Oh, I don't know what he saw, but he saw the evil in the man's eye and knew right away what he was all about. Of course,
Wow.
I'm translating from French, but that's what the legend essentially is.
Well, he does seem like the
So,
kind of guy that would have the intuition to pick those things out. I'm
oh,
sure from the sounds of it, he dealt with a lot of harassment from these types of people. So I don't doubt it.
this was even before the war, apparently. So I'm sure beforehand he was dealing with some of that. Um, he he was more or less unmolested for the longest time until the war came out. To be fair, they did destroy his communists. I think in Montreal destroyed his newspaper production facility not once but twice. So they burned it all to the ground, which was a tactic that they employed mostly throughout Europe. Um, and like the NSDAP would, for example, go into communist areas, into their little compounds, and destroy the newspaper printing presses, and vice versa. So um, that's another little tidbit, but I think that's in the book, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I do remember reading about that. Um, just on the topic of the amount of harassment he faced, it sounds like he lived for a good. He had a long life, relatively long life. So I was wondering if we have much about his later life. Like, did he continue to face harassment post war, or did that kind of die down over
So
time?
I'll give a little background. So he was released in 1945, and this man is not afraid of harassment. So he requested from the government that they put him to trial for sedition and for treason. And he's like, I'm not a traitor. I've never been a traitor, and I am happy. Also, I've never taken funds from the Nazi Party, which was one of the allegations at the time, and which was unfounded. It was based off of communist lies. So there is a at the time there's an article in Maclean's that so like today. It's funny. um I'll give an anecdote before I give the I'll finish the story before I give the anecdote and compare it to today. But essentially, there's a Maclean's article published by a communist Jew out in Toronto, which accused him of taking Nazi Party funds. Unfounded and unbased, and obviously an unscrupulous liar had wrote the words, and that was used as part of the evidence for his arrestation.
Extremely
Obviously,
unbased.
we can think of many examples, all of us listening, of that going on today, where, for example, anti-for communist articles are used as evidence against political dissidents. So they write hit pieces
Did
in
you
the
by chance
journals.
see that? I'm not sure where I saw that on Telegram today, but the I think Joel Davis published that this Jewish think tank out of Australia just overtly said to never report the truth about right wing groups, like never report on them at all, and when you have to, just lie about them and don't even use their lingo. They're really terrified of any piece of information about us getting out accurately.
Yeah, I'm on my Telegram right now. I'll quote it. So Joel writes, Jewish media outlet in Australia, plus 61J, has issued an advisory from Jew, I think that's Michelle Grossman's CRIS, to never report on the far right factually. So it's based on a CRIS funded report put together by the worm tongue like Mario Puker, calling for the media to enact heavy censorship and editorializing of reporting on the far right, giving this the name strategic silence. So this is nothing new, to be honest. This has been going on even before fascism is a thing. There's always been political dissent that has been scrutinized and repressed. But
And
again, we see an example of it happening 100 years ago almost,
mhm.
maybe 90 years ago. It's the same struggle. Obviously, it's harder now that there's a monopoly on the media, unlike there was in the past.
Yes. Well, I'm
And
not a student of history. I am a fan of Dan Carlin. Weren't the Holy Wars like about Protestantism in Germany in the 1500s called the pamphlet wars sometimes? Because they would distribute pamphlets and burn each other's pamphlets in printing presses as well, even then.
yeah, it's funny since we've started building printing presses, we've also been destroying them. Uh, yeah, so it was called the Pamphlet Wars, I think in German though, not in the English vernacular, um, for example. But I think we took that name from them. So various Protestant and Catholic groups would print their form of propaganda, their form of ideology of the day. And yes, it would lead to worse than just the destruction and burning of pamphlets, but it would lead to death. That was one of the most devastative wars in European history, in my opinion. Those The Counter Reformation and the Reformation were quite destructive.
Yes.
My dad once told me that in Berlin, wolves would roam the streets because of how depopulated it had become. The city had become.
Wow. So you made, I mean, Arcam makes it very clear that he's bringing Catholicism to fascism in a way. And you seem to think that it was Catholicism that brought him to fascism. Did I say that all backwards?
Ooh,
Regardless, I mean, he brings a very Catholic tone to fascism, unlike Hitler, for instance. But
so
do you think there's anything unique to Catholicism that makes it very, uh, that makes it work good?
there seems to be something that is there. Like I do believe there is a there compared to Protestantism, and at least if we're going to do a one for one comparison, there's something about that Catholic ideology that almost requires a top down um I'm trying to think, a top down structure of civilization where the power is imposed upon the people, but the people also support the entire power structure. So it is that top down approach with the bottom up support. Um, and that is a commonality between fascism, between National Socialism, and I guess what we could call the papacy. There's also a lot of other ideals. For example, modern Catholicism. That's not the right proper religious term for it, but Catholicism since the, let's say, since the late 1800s, and National Socialism and fascism draw a lot of the same sources of inspiration and also have the same enemies. Uh, for example, Freemasons, for example, Jews, for example, communists. So when you have the same enemies, you tend to come to sort of similar conclusions on how to deal with them. And if I were to add on that, there's not as much focus on liberal thinking in either ideology. And I'm not saying that Protestants are necessarily liberal, but they do have more of that free thinking uh, vision of the world, I would say, compared to either or.
Well, yeah, it would probably depend on which particular branch, but there, yes, there's some.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, but yeah, well, that's the problem, if we're comparing Protestantism to Catholicism, which Protestants, which century, it's almost impossible to make that such a determination, right? But
Yes,
I'm generalizing from
yes,
based off of the time period. They were obviously more conservative than they are today. So I was trying to put that in that perspective. It wasn't an opinion of modern Protestants, but more or Catholics really, but of Protestants and Catholics of the time. So I would say they also draw great inspiration from the Middle Ages as well. Like there is, for example, in Catholicism, what's called the Catholic social doctrine, upon which is, well, first of all, it's based off of the Middle Age. Um, the Middle Age economic system to a certain point, and both this social doctrine, which is supposed to be the social doctrine of the church even up to today, is shared by National Socialism and fascism.
Well, yeah,
yes,
it makes sense how there's some similarities there because obviously, if you're a Catholic, you're expected uh, to contribute to your community in a positive way. And the notion of being this individual who has the freedom to act however they desire goes against that because, well, your free acts, even if you think they're isolated to yourself, always have an impact on the rest of the society. So the necessity of some sort of system that has collective accountability um, makes sense. It comes into play. Now, I guess on this note, I don't know if this was in the book, but I remember reading it somewhere. Something about Adrian Arcand um, sending a letter to Rome to ask about his standing with the church and if his beliefs, his ideological beliefs, contradicted the church or not. And if I remember correctly, they didn't give him a response that said that he contradicted the church and that he was in poor standing. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that because I'm not sure if I read it in the book or if it was just something floating around somewhere.
So the context of that is the at the time the papacy had written a they don't call it a papal bull. It was I think it was a rerum, if I'm not mistaken, which had essentially condemned, uh, in no clear terms at least, one, communism, uh, precisely, but in no clear terms socialism. And the issue that was taken, and this was an attack against Germany specifically, um, is that the Pope at the time was playing politics against the Germans, specifically, and said that National Socialism is a form of socialism, although not in those words. But we are condemning socialism, and you claim to be National Socialists. So there was a strong implication that caused a bit of a scandal in Germany, and Arcan, who did believe in the authority of the Pope and who did believe in the Catholic Church, did take some offense to this, being a National Socialist himself. And what had happened was is that he did write to the Pope to find out if his beliefs were to be condemned or not. And I think he would have actually at least looked at his opinions again a second time if it were to be found that he had opposed church doctrine. Essentially, that was the entire purpose of his letter. I think it was in the book, Serviam, as I translated it, and he essentially wrote that in this letter, the rerum. He wrote that I find. I'm trying to think. It was more or less. I find no reason to suspect that my beliefs are in fact contradictory to the teachings of the church, to the point that where I myself would be heretical. is essentially his argument. And he wrote a letter trying to insist and to make sure that it was in fact the case. And I don't think they did condemn him, and they did not ask him to renounce his views.
Okay, and that's really interesting to me because um, I've seen modern Catholics take that approach where they say, well, this is an evil ideology that should be completely dropped, and no Catholic would ever hold these ideas. But here's a case study of a very devout Catholic who was concerned. And like you said, he wrote that letter specifically because he was willing to give up his beliefs and if they did contradict his faith. But it seems to me that no, that they did not find grounds for condemnation here. So I like to bring this up in discussions surrounding that.
And first of all, I forgot to mention it just before I jump into that. The very first forms of fascism that had essentially sprouted out in Europe in the 20th century were of Catholic origin as well. They were not National Socialism; they were fascism first, which had hints of Catholicism. They were the integralists in Spain, for example. They were actually, the Quebecers were among the first fascists. The French Canadians were among the first fascists or proto-fascists as well. The French had many. So I just wanted to bring that up as a last point. In regards to what you had just said, I needed to tread carefully because it's hard to convince a Catholic that the ideology is appropriate, that it does actually fall as an acceptable worldview, especially because the history is so controlled and has been written by the winners. It's it's such a it's a poison pill. Honestly, there's so many difficult ways to approach there's so many traps when you approach this, and it is difficult to approach. I would say that it is no less and no more egregious than what was believed in the Middle Ages under under Catholic nations. And with that, that's my thesis, and I can branch out from there when they ask their questions, and I can make a compare and contrast between the two essential ideologies, whether that be fascism or National Socialism.
Yes, the criticisms from say other right wingers who maybe aren't Christian would be that if your ideology um, disarms you, if it doesn't allow you to do what must be done or to entertain notions that would possibly lead to victory but be outside of the tenets of your faith, that the thing itself must be discarded. And you shouldn't hold your faith above, say, the white race or something like that. I wonder if both of you would have comments on that.
I was being a Catholic myself, a traditional Catholic. I was in the presence of a priest who was giving a speech just on that topic in Quebec City some time ago, and he essentially said you had to put your nation, well, and I took that literally to mean race, first, even above religion at times. That, yes, maybe not every single day, but yes, you are allowed to put one above the other. It is a possibility, but you should always do it, if obviously from the Catholic point of view, is you should always do it with the love of God and the love of others. You can take the philosophy of Jesus Christ, love thy neighbor and love thyself, uh, can be extrapolated to mean that first you love yourself, the individual, you focus on yourself, and then you can, for example, convert others. You better yourself as a man before you try to convert others. Then you focus on your family. So, like in a plane, you put your own mask on first if the plane is about to crash before you even put on your children's mask. It's the same principle. Take care of yourself first, then your family, and then what comes next? It's your village, it's your people, it's your race, and then the nation. and then after that, it's the whole world. It's humanity.
Hmm. Remove the AIDS shot from thine own arm before you remove the COVID shot from mine. I think that's in the Bible. Yes, it's
That's quite the quote.
I might be misremembering that, but something like that.
Still unvaccinated.
Yeah.
They're never gonna get me.
No, they're not going to get us now.
I'll have to come out with super COVID.
Well,
If the death rate go up, I'll think about the vaccine. How about that?
yeah, I'm still waiting for that $500 check.
You know what? My price at the initial point was 50,000. They never got back to me.
Shame.
Well,
But yeah, well, I was just gonna respond because on NP's point there as well. I would say in that in the whole ordering of, well, what do you put first in terms of your faith or your material conditions, your race? I would say, just my opinion from a Catholic perspective is that you still have to put God first. You still put your faith first, um, but in the right ordering of things. That shouldn't mean that suddenly you kill yourself on behalf of God, like that, because that would obviously contradict the faith anyways. Like if you're doing what is good in line with God and Christ, then there's no reason that you should be destroying your own nation in that process. Like those two things don't really align with each other.
yes. The way I'd put it as a gross heretic is this: you put God first always, but then when it comes to religion, so in this case, not religion, which would be God Himself or your relationship with Him, but your sect or the dogma or your parish, that you would sometimes put first, as Charles is saying, and sometimes you'd put other groups and considerations first. And I suppose you'd have to ask God Himself which to put first when it gets difficult to choose.
Right, and the other thing too to keep in mind is a lot of an issue that a lot of people run into in this sort of discussion is when people talk about, well, we got to do anything to win, for example. You have to ask what for, because if you do anything to win and then that causes you to compromise your own morals and your own faith, well, then what was it for in the end? If you just destroy your soul in the process, then you haven't really put the right ends of your action in mind. And like I said before, I don't think those things are mutually exclusive. If you do what's good for God in the first place, then you're not going to lose. And the other thing too is that you're not necessarily called to win constantly. You're called to just fight the flesh and be in the battle for the spirit. So it can get really easy to say, oh yeah, well, we need to win at any cost. But the reflection on what that actually means sometimes gets put off to the side, because you want the expediency and you want the immediacy when there's a wider spiritual context at play here.
Yes, we discussed that at length when we were reading Ivan Ilyin. I don't suppose you probably read him too, eh, D'Entremont?
Sorry, what is this book?
He's an Orthodox fella, but Ivan Ilyin's On Resistance to Evil by Force.
No, I'm actually not familiar with him.
Oh, you'd like that one. I think you'd get a kick out of that, even though he's Orthodox. But you have to forgive him because he's from Russia.
No problem. You can send me the link afterwards. I'll gladly take a look.
Yes, and I'll do a plug here. Also, Servium was published by Antelope Hill. I believe On Resistance to Evil by Force was published by call them rivals. I think that was Imperium Press, if I'm not mistaken. But either way,
No,
both were Antelope Hill.
No,
No,
not at all.
Oh,
And Resistance to Evil by Force is like a normal publisher.
oh, my mistake. Never mind then. But yeah, we'll plug you again at the end. But everyone, if you haven't read the speeches of Adrian Arcan, then you are missing out. And
it is a book that you should be reading for
it's
sure.
by
You should have read
far,
it already, but now's your chance to buy it.
yeah.
Oh, guys, I agree, and that's project came up in the first place. Um, Antelope Hill. I went to Antelope Hill and asked them, "What did you want me to translate?" And they said either Joseph Michel or Adrien Arcan, and I'm like, Arcan all the way. Let's do it. I'm game. I don't care what the terms are for the contract. I want to do it, and I would have done it for free. Like he literally does it for free, and I essentially did.
That's some terrible negotiating tactics there, but we appreciate your efforts.
Negotiating. They gave me everything I ever wanted. I don't know what you're talking about.
That's a good attitude, man. That is a really good
that's
attitude.
great. Well, do you have anything else
Also,
you're doing for them?
actually, before, no, I wanted to actually translate a book by Philippe Henriot. So he's a Frenchman, who was essentially the propaganda minister for Vichy France, and he wrote a book called February 6th, which was about the revolt that occurred in Paris on February 6th of, I think it was 1930. Oh boy, I'm drawing a blank, but I think it was in the 30s. So this was during the interwar period, and it was essentially what happened was is that all of the like nationalist parties essentially got together in France, in Paris, and almost had a coup d'état. And this was essentially due to what was known at the time as the Stavinsky affair. So, um, Jewish corruption in France had caused an almost fascist coup in the country at the time, and we missed it because they were just disorganized between the parties and between the various factions. So you had monarchists, you have I think what they called well, you had like proto-fascists, monarchists. You had Charles Maurras and his gang, et cetera, et cetera. I can't remember everyone who was involved, but it was it was kind of one of those this close kind of affairs
Yeah.
that never occurred.
That's
So
a Hearts
if
of
I were to
Iron 4 map I want to play for sure.
oh, it sounds great. I haven't read the book yet, but if I were to translate something else, it'd probably end up being that.
Yeah, that'd be very interesting. And then if you're trying to make, I'm not sure how you feel about the French New Right. I'm not sure how we feel about it either. I haven't read it, so it'd be good if someone translated more of that. Benoit.
It's not in English yet.
It's probably in English.
No, I think a lot of it is Alain de Benoit is in English.
Well, he'd be all his stuff would be, but there's a few of them as I understand it.
But it's not that important, honestly, as a work. I don't see much value to it either way, but I'm sure it's translated into English by now.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys that I think that are on top of that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, are there any?
I agree here with the idea it's not that important, because I guess it's
like it should be done.
Catholic.
Like, don't get me wrong, it should be done. There's also another book which I just picked up that's on it's by one of Henriot's friends. His pen name was Thierry Molyneux, and I picked him up because honestly the book looked really cool, but he turned out to be one of the Rexist party members, so a friend of who's Léon de Grelle.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
De Grelle. All his works are translated into English and Spanish and a bunch of other languages a long time ago, as far as I'm aware. But it was a friend of de Grelle. That's his pen name. I don't remember his real name. And I actually picked up a book called Introduction to French Poetry by him. And he apparently wrote a book called, in English, it would be something to the effect of like a warning to the Americans about their involvement in World War II. I can't find a copy of it, but I think that's from what I can gather, that's something that needs to be translated equally into English because it's in French. You're warning the Americans, but the warning's in French, unfortunately. And I have a feeling there might be some prescient information in that book.
It comes
Yeah,
too
that's
late for the Americans, but not too late for fans of history.
Well, I mean, the lessons can maybe be redrawn and repurposed for today.
Yes.
I
absolutely.
Um, I'm not the biggest intellectual either. I'm actually writing my own stuff right now. So I did an article with Zoltanus, and which you guys can check out if you find a Substack,
I'm
which
not
I highly
reading
recommend.
Zoltanus until he turns 21.
Oh, but you can read me on I'm past 21, I
Fair
promise.
enough, fair enough.
Anyways, I know he's a little edgy, but I like him. He's a good guy. He like you said, he's 21, and young people are always like that. I was probably no better at my age. Sorry, not at my age. At his age, I was probably no better than he was. But that's not an attack against him. I like the
No,
guy, and
no.
he knows me. But he's young. He gets it. Anyway, I wrote an article essentially comparing modern conservatives to so in America to the French revolutionaries sans culotte, as they call them, so without trousers. And I took jabs at it, and essentially the whole thing came to my mind when all the conservatives started calling Patriot Front a bunch of feds, and they
Oh
like
yeah.
went down that
Oh.
conspiracy. So the joke was essentially, well, the sans culottes are without trousers because they had no general uniform and they couldn't afford proper garments. And the joke is that the modern conservatives can't organize to wear khakis and a blue like a blue coat that you could probably get at Walmart. No offense to Patriot Front, I'm sure they have better gear than that, but you know what I mean. It's like they can't even like color coordinate.
Yeah.
What kind of
And
patriot has the money to rent a U-Haul?
well, that's right. 200 bucks. Hey, no one's got money. No one's got money for that. Um, but the whole idea is like, how are they conservative? Like, what is going on? And I was like, what are they? A bunch of revolutionary freaks from France? And then it dawned on me, and yes, they are. They're the same level of mediocrity. For example, they are highly conservative, nationalistic as well. So there's that. Like the French revolutionaries were extremely French centric and thought that they had the best nation on earth. They were extremely inclined to believe in any and all conspiracies.
Oh man.
It goes on and on and on, and they draw from the same professional class as well. And they're pretty mad that they were just losing money. So there's an economic point as well. So I'm currently, I published that, and now I'm currently working on revolutionary theory
Okay.
in my home.
Where can we find that article?
That's on Zoltanus's Substack. So it's on Substack.
I'll find it from there. I'll post a link after.
Yeah, there's some good stuff on there. He's got a few people who wrote for him as well, so always check it out. Give him a shout out.
I'll forgive him for being young
sure.
if he forgives me for being old. It's fair enough.
There you go. Yeah. Of course, it's the middle of the road guy here who's not too old, not too young, kind of bridging the gap again.
Always got to be
kidding.
someone like that. No.
Yeah.
One thing that also came to my mind. If I recall, there wasn't really much about Arcan's sense of Canadian identity or Canadian nationalism, like the very specifically Canadian approach. And I think that was intentional from you, or intentional from the collection. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, and the reason for that is because first of all, he was a nationalist, a Canadian nationalist, in that he was not a separatist, a French Canadian separatist. He believed in the British monarchy and the British right to rule over all of Canada. He did not want to separate the country, so um, he was looking for new points to move past the old Canadian system, though, I would say, um, the old Britishness, and to give Canada a new identity. And he was in the middle of working on that. And that's why you can't really um, draw distinction. Oh, you can draw many distinctions between his presentation and the presentation of Canadianism, especially British Canadianism. So he wouldn't like he did use the maple leaf, for example. He did use some of the songs. He didn't want to get rid of history completely. That wasn't his point. But he also wanted to build upon it. He wanted Canada to have its own place as a part of the Commonwealth and have its own identity that was uh, British in essence, or European in essence at least, but distinctively so, colonial, in fact.
Right. And I think that's a lot of what Canadians are looking for right now. Is they're kind of lost. They've been stripped of any sort of notion of Canadian identity because it's, well, Canadian can be anyone born anywhere. That's what we're told. We're this post nation state, according to our leaders. And so everyone's, yeah, you have a general sense of white identity, but you can still tell that you're not quite European in an old world sense, and you're not quite American. And so knowing that there was someone in the past, like Arkan, working towards reifying that sense, I think that's a strong point for us to grab on. And I think a lot of Canadians need to continue working at developing that sense of that specific Canadianness.
I my 22-year-old self might have agreed. I I'm not that optimistic, and I don't know if there's anything there that we could still grab on from the old Canada. For the moment, it's a very difficult thing to do. I'd rather just almost move forward and not abandon the past and not forget it, but to just press forward and to forge our own identity and our own Canadian people.
Sure.
That is just it's 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 complicated, and there's
Yes.
no clear answer, obviously.
We probably have to shred any existing common political sphere, but we can keep our common ethnic bonds and build off of that into the future. I fully agree.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm pointing at here is that there is this sense of self, but it's gotta come forward from where we are now.
It's like the elements are there. It just requires an artist to paint a nice picture for everyone to see clearly. Especially since we have no true leaders these days in our country to point us in any positive direction. We have to which is good because we actually get to form our own path as naturally as possible without any interference of higher powers, whether they be economic powers or political powers. We're sort of forced to steer the ship ourselves. So we can use that to our advantage. And again, there's not going to be one direct answer. I think I don't think Canada is going to break up anytime soon. But I also think that we're going to start suffering more and more from the doldrums of Americanism and the American empire. So we're starting to see more violence up here. We're starting to see drug overdoses like out in Vancouver. So that epidemic has plagued us as much. We sent a lot of our guys to Afghanistan too, and Iraq and the Middle East all throughout. We're essentially America's little brother, and we have to suffer the same consequences. So where if America implodes, Canada can't be that far off, whether it maintains itself uh, geographically or not. I think it will, despite being such a large territory. I think that we might be able to pull something together in the long term that still resembles a Canada that we recognize today.
It'll take good
Yeah, I think
statesmanship, another Laurier or something of that sort.
yeah, and I think that's well said. And I like the analogy of the artist to paint the picture that's clear for everyone to see. And one of the things that we talk about in the show quite a bit is the notion of um, these the sort of more local approach, the neo-tribal approach, where you build that identity from interacting with the people around you and living
Take good.
the good life with who you have that you can connect to. And like you said, you can, with the way the leadership is, there's actually space to make that all happen. Again, it just requires some intention in your approach.
Absolutely. But the problem is organization. The problem is, and I see it in a lot of our guys here. I'm familiar with quite a few, being implicated myself in the politics. The reason why I like I would call myself more Catholic than National Socialist, even though that would have been the case, the different case previously, is because a lot of the more secular guys just seem to lack that oomph, that drive in order to carry out a long fight. And I don't mean that case by case necessarily. Sorry, yeah, sorry, that's not case by case. That's not everyone, but there are a few exceptions, and they're just a minority. And it's a sad fact that just from my experience in understanding men and understanding how the human mind functions, is that those who have a spiritual inclination tend to last longer in this thing. Um, that doesn't mean that I'm going to shun away those who are not, uh, without any higher value, who don't have that higher value system. But it does mean that you need to find something that actually is more than just race, because I don't think it's enough. I don't think that we can just be white nationalists and nothing else. You know, you're it like the liberal mindset, the materialist liberal mindset is actually perfectly right if you only look at it from the materialist point of view, that there isn't such thing as race in so fact scientific race in the sense. Well, like I'm gonna get hurt for this one. Let me rephrase that. There's obviously something as race. There's obviously something as IQ differences, as different diseases between races, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not denying the science like they do, but when it comes to governance, if at the end of the day all you have is a material worldview, yes, a Chinaman can replace a European, who can replace an African, who can replace I don't know, a Mexican or whatever, or a South American. Um, because if you only look at it in economic terms, and no, they're perfectly right. Uh, we are replaceable. It's when you have a higher power that you become irreplaceable. You do become an individual with value.
In actual
Yeah,
engineering, we call it fit, form, and function. You can swap out vendors and even the name of the piece as long as it has the same fit, the same, and it'll do the same thing. But
Yeah, but can you replace a metal bit with a plastic bit? That's a question, right?
yeah, no, it would have to be It would have to be good to the same temperature ratings. It would have to, etc., etc. No,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, I mean, the comparison between the machine and a state proper would be, well, what happens when you just replace the whole machine? Do you have the same machine at the end of the day? No, you don't, obviously.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
but
you
for
don't
for the
gotta think about
purpose,
Theseus's ship there. It's just a completely different fucking
yeah.
thing.
Well, that's it, right? And none of us want that. I don't even think Catholics, like, the most tepid of them, really want that. When you get them a little alcohol and they open up to you, they tend to just overflow in emotion, anyways. In regards to the preservation of their people, it's not Actually, I want to go back to what was said before, because we were talking about, um, oh, do you put race first? Do you put religion first? Like, that's such a poison pill. Um,
Yeah.
why not do both? Like, I reject the premise entirely, and that's the whole point why I myself am a National Socialist. Why I myself am a Catholic is because I can do two things at once. And when you say, "Oh, but aren't there contradictions?" Yes, but I have contradictions within my own Catholicism and in my own National Socialism. I have contradictions when I wake up in the morning, but I don't want to get out of bed. Sometimes, you like, life is contradiction. It's struggle. It's about facing reality. And even if you were purely Catholic without any ideology, you have to come up with contradictions in your life every time you want to sin, but your mind tells you, no, it's not worth doing that. You want to make it to heaven. Life is contradiction. It's the same. It's the same thing with ideology. If you add that factor in, well, you there's nothing else to say, but you just deal with it when you deal with it. Um, you need more, uh, in the modern world. You need more guidance and more structure than just religion. uh, that's one of the reasons why religion no longer has as much of an impact on our lives, is because it has abandoned the material world almost completely, in the sense that it doesn't wish to actually uh, become a player in the real world. Not as much as it used to be. It doesn't want to play the role of, for example, matchmaker between young individuals for the formation of families. It doesn't want to have any social benefit whatsoever. It does the very bare minimum today and collects taxes. Well, the it collects the basket and the offering, and that's it.
Yeah, and George Grant actually talked about that a little bit in some of his works, where he makes the point that a lot of, especially in North America, there was this tendency to just say, "Oh, leave the spiritual up to the individual, and then let society do its own thing," and encourage people just to work the best they can in the world. And well, when you just leave that up to the individual, they fall into sin, and then it becomes all about um, personal profit or getting results, and then that supersedes the morals that you once held, because you just leave that in a separate sphere. So I think that's a fair point, that with your faith, you can't just set that off to the side and say, oh, it's a separate world. You have to live it still, and that, as a result, means that you have to face material reality, and you have to confront a lot of these tough problems that are a result of much of, I mean, what the world is, like you said, struggle.
And at the end of the day, if you're incapable of facing that reality and you only want to do the religious aspect, then I recommend you become a priest or a sister or a brother, because that's probably a better place for you, honestly. uh, uh, Otherwise, you're lying to yourself. Because if you tell me, "Oh, I have no ideology," perhaps not a well-founded one, but you live ideology every single day without thinking it. You live in a capitalist worldview. That's an ideology. You accept that. Now, if you actually thought about it and what you're doing, and then we compare and contrast again to what National Socialism has to offer, for example, well, you would discover a few things about yourself that you might find uncomfortable.
Yeah, and
No,
again,
but
again, that's a good point. There's that pure spiritual life that you can embark on if that's truly your position. Um, so yeah, it's got to be taken all together, and then you live according to the vocation, you live according to what you're good at, and people have to be honest with that.
Precisely.
yeah, find out if you're a Hufflepuff or a Gryffindor and go with it. Simple. Do the BuzzFeed test.
Hey, they actually simplified it a lot for the Zoomers, because they realized that four different archetypes were too many for their little pitiful minds. It's now either tranny or Nazi. Pick one.
Oh man. Oh god. Oh jeez. Um.
Oh
Well,
geez, and
we had the Ninja Turtles when I was growing up. In order instead of the
now
Harry Potter
forced.
housers.
I'm sorry, forced too many for their minds. Like we're now in the 10-second TikTok world. It's two options and nothing else.
I guess Nazi, but check back on me. Check back on me tomorrow. I might change my mind. I don't know.
Yeah, you can't flip flop. Like what? Like either way, there's a surgery involved, and you just can't renege on it.
When do I get my 27 Space Marine organs put in then?
In time, in time. I think there's a trial before that. You got to pass a few tests.
Well, if they know where to find me. Perfect.
I'll make you do push-ups live on the show again.
Oh god, I'm 3 beers in. Not right now. But yeah, I was just actually pinching my gut fat, and this office work has done me no favors. I'm cultivating mass, but I think it's time to hit the gym again. You work
Yeah,
out?
it sounds like. Pardon?
Have you embraced the self improvement aspect of this whole thing? You a gym goer?
I used to be. I was more into sports than the gym itself, and I've always been a pretty athletic guy anyway. So I had no real like. I mean, there's always room for self improvement, but it didn't hit me as it might have other people who might have desperately needed to improve their fitness. I was already able to do like 50 push-ups. I was already able to do all the pull-ups I needed to do to impress the girls. So.
Well, yeah, sports is just as good, if not better, because there's just so much more involved in athleticism as opposed to just the gym. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
I found the gym too boring, honestly, for myself. Anyways, like I had good workouts in, but I didn't like just lifting weights for an hour. I'd rather be playing sports or something, or going on hikes or just something that's a little more dynamic.
right, that's good stuff.
Yep. That's, yep.
I've been focusing a lot on spiritual life recently, anyway. Uh, and I had a lot of changes in my life in the last 2-3 years. So there's that as well. Got plenty of exercise in, but not as much as I used to when I was a younger lad.
No, the spiritual development is a huge one. Once you've done the physical, you have to fulfill the spiritual. So it's a necessary next step.
I'm actually on just the most odious part of self improvement, where with a laser focus on my finances, and I have to tell you, it goes against every bone in my body.
That's the worst one. That's a kicker, especially today. With what's going on in the economy, it's incredible. It's everything's precarious.
Yeah, well, fortunately, I have a job tangentially related to the defense industry now, so I'm feeling a little more secure. But still that grind. I've just been grinding.
Yeah. Well, it's like the problem is like money just feels tight for everyone, you know.
Yeah, no, it's
Um,
awful.
you just feel it at the grocery store. It adds extra stress. And I remember like back in the day, I'd have no problem dropping maybe $100, $200, $1,000 from time to time if I needed to on a product or service. And now it's like $25.
Yep. Yeah.
I can do like $2.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tight out there. Yeah.
But I don't think I'm gonna talk about finance and the
No,
economy.
no, no. I'll. It's a black pill across the board. I have no good advice. Except keep your head down and good luck.
That's some good advice. My advice is maybe don't buy that thing you don't need right now. Save the money. wait an extra week or something. Don't do it. It's the economy can collapse at any second now. It, and you'll be happier without the product anyway. I promise you.
Yeah, that's pretty solid. Any
Best I can.
closing comments or questions, Charles?
I think I got everything that I had planned on asking, and it was really well elaborated. I learned quite a bit more than I'd already known so far about Archon. So I think I really appreciate all the info you've given us so far.
Yeah, that was super interesting.
It's my pleasure. I'm trying to think of there's anything I have to ask you guys. No, not at the moment. I'm pretty satisfied with how the chat went, so appreciate you having me on.
Good. Well, and
Thanks for
come
coming on,
call
man.
in. Yeah, come call in sometime, anytime.
Yeah, sure, 100%. I'm happy to do so. You guys stream on Sundays, right?
We're trying to stick to Sundays. If it ends up all over the map, well, we
So
run
be
a
it.
tight ship
We're,
around here.
we're doing the best we can. I guess it's Mother's Day next weekend, so it might be a little, but we'll stay on that general course.
I have maybe like one more thing to give in regards to the spiritual versus material world.
Sure.
Um, the last thing I was reading is called The Soul of the Apostolate by um, Chotard, and like Chautard. And I think he was a priest in France some time ago, right after St. Pius X. So I think 1920s, if I'm not mistaken. And he actually does, from a Catholic perspective, go quite deep into uh, the duality of the spiritual and the material world. And he actually does lay out a case for how you should balance the two, or should you prioritize one completely over the other. So if I had to give a recommendation that would explain at least the Catholic view of how to balance the two, that would be it.
That's awesome that you recommended that, because I would love to read more on that particular topic, because it always seems very tough, and having something that guides you through that process would be unreal.
It's a very difficult read. I must admit. There's something about that the spiritual mind that uh, at least we today are not very familiar with. It
Mm-hmm.
almost feels like reading something from the Middle Ages, because of the high priority of the spiritual matter over the physical matter, when we ourselves live in the opposite case, where the material is above the spiritual and everything. So I don't know how the translation is in English. I know it exists. I know it can be found online, for example, for free, and copies of it are not expensive whatsoever. But from what I've gathered from other people, there are good translations out there of the book. And it was one of those things that was so difficult to get into initially. I had to restart it 5 times before I actually picked it up properly, and I devoured it really, really quickly. I'm almost done the book entirely. The ending gets a little repetitive. I think the point gets across by page 250, but after that, go like you don't have to read the rest. After that, go start with the first 100 pages, see if you like it. And honestly, it's a recommended read. I've never had a book that was so unappealing at the start, and that's just somehow, once I persevered through it, managed to grasp my attention every single line the way it did.
Nice. Well, thanks for that recommendation. I'm definitely interested in checking that out. And you listeners, you should check out the collected works of Adrian Arcan, Serviam, from Antelope Hill. So go to Antelope Hill's website and get yourself a copy, because if you haven't read it already, it's absolutely necessary reading.
And yeah, they're a very good publisher. Like, it sits on your shelf, nice. It's got a good cover.
It looks nice. It looks nice.
Um, they're not amateurs at all. It could be it might as well be a Penguin classic for the quality. You know what I'm saying? If not
Yeah.
better.
At the same time, are you guys reading anything else from them? I got a few more minutes if you want.
I'm not much of a reading man anymore. I'm more of a Warhammer 40K podcast kind of guy. But
Mm.
but tell us what you got.
I mean, they gave me a bit of their entire collection. My significant other was asking me what National Socialism was, so I just picked up the Conquering Berlin book by Wilfred Bade and just started reading it to her. So that was fun.
That was a fun book,
That's a
yeah.
that's a good read. It's short too. Like you could probably
hmm
get it through in an afternoon if you were eager. Pierce was actually pretty interesting as well. I liked his opinion on the education system. I would recommend that.
Oh,
Oh,
actually. Oh, that yeah, I'm curious. I'm curious. That'd be good.
oh man. Do you want me to read a quote from the education part?
Yeah, sure.
All right, hold on. Let me pull it up. That's uh that's from his collected works, also of Antelope Hill. But he starts off pretty strong. In chapter 1, he calls it the murder machine, which is what he describes as the English educational system in Ireland. But I'll read a few paragraphs. A French writer has paid the English a very well-deserved compliment. He says that they never commit a useless crime. When they hire a man to assassinate an Irish patriot, when they blow a sepoy from the mouth of a cannon, when they produce a famine in one of their dependencies, they always have an ulterior motive. They do not do it for fun. Humorous as these crimes are, it is not the humor of them, but their utility that appeals to the English. Unlike Gilbert's Mikado, they would see nothing humorous in boiling oil. If they retained boiling oil in their penal code, they would retain it, as they retain flogging before execution in Egypt, strictly because it has been found useful. This observation will help one to an understanding of some portions of the English administration of Ireland. The English administration of Ireland has not been marked by any unnecessary cruelty. Every crime that the English have planned and carried out in Ireland has had a definite end. Every absurdity that they have set up has had a grave purpose. The famine was not enacted merely from a love of horror. The boards that rule Ireland were not contrived in order to add to the gaiety of the nations. The famine and the boards are like parts of a profound polity. I have spent the greater part of my life in immediate contemplation of the most grotesque and horrible of the English inventions for the debasement of Ireland. I mean their education system. The English once proposed in their Dublin Parliament a measure from the castration of all Irish priests who refused to quit Ireland. The proposal was so filthy that, although it duly passed the House and was transmitted to England with the warm recommendation of the Viceroy, it was not eventually adopted. At,
Wow.
that was page 1.
Holy
That's
shit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Patrick Pierce. I read that anthology, and very interesting and inspiring man.
Very cutting wit.
wait. I want to leave this on a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
The next line is, but the English have actually carried out an even filthier thing. ... You'll have to read the rest.
Mm.
I thought I had to end it there.
Yeah, that's good.
For
That's good,
sure.
man.
You gotta buy the book. You gotta buy the book to find out.
Yeah, that's the Irish are always a delight to read, no matter what they're writing about, but especially when they're angry.
Oh, or drunk, but the two go hand in hand.
Yeah, well, that's a gimme. That's the center square of their bingo card.
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean they're a fascinating people with a fascinating history who have a remorseful past, unfortunately. And if I were beaten down like that, I too would be a drunkard.
Yeah. Or Keith Wood's worst case scenario.
Wait,
if you know, you know. If you know, you know. Yeah. All right. Yeah, we're gonna call it a night. Thanks everyone for watching. Everyone like, share, subscribe, buy the books. Go call your grandma. Go to church. Lift some weights.
With your mom. Go buy your mom a Mother's Day gift.
Good reminder.
Fire Pedrak Pierce to read.
Yeah, yeah.
Or Serviam.
Tell her it's true crime.
No.
Tell her it's a true crime novel and make her read Servium.
No. Okay, well that's fair. That's good.
Antelope Hill books. I could just see like their imagine their like their reviews online. It's like my son on Amazon. My son recommended me this book and it is awful.
Perfect. All right. See you guys all soon. I'm ending the stream. Goodbye.
See ya.